We're surrounded by just this explosion of knowledge, aren't we? I mean, every single day you hear about new discoveries, fresh ideas, completely different ways of looking at the world seem to surface constantly. But for you, our curious listener, how do you truly know which ones genuinely matter? Which breakthroughs are, just clever, maybe temporary fixes? And which ones are the fundamental shifts that will genuinely reshape everything we understand about reality? Here on Deep Dive, well, our mission is really to cut through all that noise. We take your sources, your research, our own extensive notes, and we really try to extract the most important nuggets of knowledge. We want to give you a shortcut to being truly well informed. We want to give you those profound aha moments without that feeling of being overwhelmed by just the sheer flood of information. Today, we're embarking on a deep dive into something, well, potentially truly revolutionary, the Unified Coherence Theory, or UCT. But we're not just going to unpack the theory itself. We're also introducing you to a brand new framework for evaluating the true, enduring impact of any discovery, something we're calling the Eureka Scale. Yeah, it's a way to measure the lasting significance of a breakthrough, beyond its immediate fanfare or that initial buzz. So our mission today is twofold. First, help you grasp the core, foundational ideas of UCT, particularly its bivector coherence formalism. And second, using this Eureka scale, we'll show you why this work isn't just another theory or another clever idea, but possibly a potential epoch-defining shift in how we understand reality itself. So let's embark on this deep dive. Maybe we can start by exploring the sheer ambition of UCT.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Every truly transformative scientific revolution, whether we look back at Newton's mechanical laws or Einstein's coherent geometry of space-time, or the probabilistic structure revealed by quantum mechanics, they didn't just explain isolated things. They fundamentally reshaped human civilization. They created entirely new ways of living, new technologies, new social structures, everything. The Unified Coherence Theory, UCT, it kind of continues this profound arc, but it does so with a radical, fundamentally new ontological foundation. It proposes that coherence is the generative principle, the thing that generates both, the forces and spaces around us, and identity, the discrete particles and forms within those fields. It's not just describing what happens, but explaining their very origin.
That's a really fascinating perspective that UCT explains origin. Could you maybe give us a concrete example of how this generative principle differs from how, say, our current understanding of the Big Bang or quantum field theory explains the emergence of reality? Because I think for many people, the idea of coherence as a generative principle might feel quite abstract.
That's a crucial distinction, absolutely. In conventional models, we often start with pre-existing entities, space-time, particles, fields, and then we describe how they interact or how they evolved from some initial state, like the Big Bang. UCT, by contrast, starts deeper, much deeper. It says that before particles or fields even exist, there's a fundamental coherence that actually gives rise to them. Think of it like a piece of music. Conventional physics might describe the individual notes and the instruments playing them. UCT is trying to understand the fundamental harmony or the underlying rhythm that makes those notes possible in the first place, or even the blueprint that causes the instruments themselves to come into being. It's an attempt to understand the wave of waves, if you will, unfolding over the 21st century, much like quantum mechanics and relativity did in the 20th. It's basically laying out a potential roadmap for the next 100 years of discovery. And this journey, it begins with what the theory calls the first wave, the seeds, projected roughly for 2023-2025. This is where UCT lays down its primal foundational equations. Imagine if the entire universe started not from some chaotic Big Bang, but from a fundamental seed of order and potential. UCT suggests these incredibly simple equations, 0, 1, which it calls hypergravity, the seed of identity, mass, and 0, 0, arable 1, representing the coherence vacuum, the seed of field, are like the ultimate genetic code for reality. They aren't just abstract mathematical symbols, they are the unified generators that bind identity and field together as complementary expressions of something deeper.
These might sound incredibly abstract, I know, but you're right. So were Newton's laws when he first penned them, or Schrodinger's equation at its birth. What I find so compelling here is that these aren't just descriptions. The claim is they form the root grammar of reality itself. They are the initial spark, the irreducible starting point from which everything else will supposedly unfold. It's like discovering the fundamental alphabet from which all the stories in the universe can be written. A pretty bold claim.
It is bold. And from these foundational seeds, the theory says we move into the second wave. Structural expansions, expected maybe between 2025 and 2040. Just as Einstein's initial relativity theory matured into complex field equations describing space-time geometry, UCT seeds expand into more elaborate formalisms. This wave introduces concepts like bivectors, multivector time, and hyperfractal manifolds. These form the essential scaffolding of coherence dynamics, detailing how that initial coherence differentiates and creates structure. This wave also includes hypersymmetry and S3 gauge unification, which is particularly significant. Conventional physics describes the fundamental forces electromagnetism, the weak, strong nuclear forces, using different mathematical symmetries. They almost feel like arbitrary rules we just observe. UCT, however, suggests these aren't just arbitrary rules at all. Instead, it posits a deeper, more elegant master symmetry, an S3 foundation from which all these familiar forces naturally emerge.
Ah, okay. So it's like discovering that all different musical instruments are simply playing variations of one fundamental melody rather than just being separate things.
Yeah, exactly that. It suggests an underlying unity that wasn't apparent before.
Then the outline suggests around 2035 to 2060, we enter the third wave, biological and consciousness. This sounds like a huge leap. This is where the coherence grammar supposedly extends directly into life and mind, bridging that infamous gap between physics and biology. We're talking about concepts like biologistics, which doesn't just see life as, a collection of chemical reactions, but as a form of coherent logistic systems actively maintaining and exchanging order. Then there's qualionomics, which redefines value and meaning not just in terms of resources, but as a coherence exchange. So, like, a shared laugh or a deep conversation isn't just nice, it's actually generating new coherence, new meaning between people, fundamentally enriching both participants. That's quite a thought.
It is. And perhaps most profoundly, consciousness itself is redefined in this wave. Not as some emergent property of complex brains, but as a universal operator of coherence, a fundamental aspect of reality, actively involved in shaping it. This wave really shifts science from focusing just on particles and fields to understanding living coherent systems in a much deeper, more integrated way. Building on that, the fourth wave, projected from 2060 to 2100, is termed cosmic and cultural. Here, UCT extends its reach to the grandest scales, to the very structure of the cosmos, and even to human societies. We might begin to understand things like galactic gradients, the dynamics of plasmatic life, and even omnilectic mathematics, which sounds like a new calculus of meaning. The idea is that culture itself will be reshaped by these new coherence ontologies, fundamentally reorganizing society, maybe in the same way industrial physics once did, prompting us to rethink everything from economics to governance through this new lens of coherence.
Wow, okay. And concurrently with some of those, you mentioned from 2040 to 2080, there's the fifth wave, applied nuclear and vacuum breakthroughs. This sounds like where the theory hits the pavement, technologically speaking. You mentioned fusion by coherence continuity, resolving those stubborn Coulomb barriers that have plagued fusion research. That alone would be world-changing. Or nuclear decay remediation, where decay isn't just random, but reinterpreted as a process of coherence restoration. That has huge implications. Then there's relativity reinterpreted for coherence propulsion, hinting at faster-than-light possibilities. And vacuum resonance engineering, tapping into the energy of this coherence vacuum. These sound like the tangible technological fruits, like you said, akin to quantum mechanics, giving us lasers and relativity powering our GPS systems. It's where the abstract theory might hit the real world in a really spectacular fashion.
Precisely. And when you connect this all together, you can really see how each wave is proposed to build upon the last. It expands the concept of coherence into wider and wider domains, starting with fundamental physics, moving to biology, then culture, and ultimately the cosmos itself. What begins as, let's face it, esoteric abstraction at the seed level, eventually, the theory claims, transforms into civilizational infrastructure. It's a profound shift in perspective, offering a potentially unified understanding of reality that touches every aspect of our existence.
Okay, so let's dive into that core piece you mentioned from the early waves, the bivector coherence formalism. You said this is where it gets particularly insightful, especially when we compare it to older ideas about scalar fields. Because, for decades, figures like John Keeley, Nikola Tesla, and Tom Bearden captivated people with their talk of hidden energies, these mysterious bipolar coils and scalar waves. Their work, while incredibly intriguing and often producing compelling phenomena, often achieved a kind of cult status, maybe because it felt so revolutionary, yet often lacked that rigorous, widely accepted grounding.
Exactly. And what's truly interesting here is that while their observations were phenomenologically suggestive, they saw real, intriguing effects. Their underlying model of scalar fields suffered from what we academics call ontological incompleteness.
Yeah.
It's a bit of jargon, but it simply means their explanation didn't go deep enough into why things were happening. It treated scalar potential as almost a leftover or a residual stress that just appeared when vectors canceled, like in a bipolar coil. They could describe what happened, the effects they observed, but it never truly explained why scalar neutrality should exist in the first place or where it fundamentally came from. It was, in essence, an ad hoc mechanics, a clever trick, perhaps, or a descriptive patchwork of observations, but not a generative principle that could fully explain the origin of those phenomena.
Right, so it described the what, but not the fundamental why.
Precisely.
So unlike that Beard and Keeley model, the bivector coherence formalism starts deeper. It starts with the hypergravity identity, that invariant source of coherence you mentioned, encoded in the 0 = 1 seed equation. From this deepest ontological layer, the bivector itself isn't a byproduct. It's presented as the first act of ontological differentiation, like the primordial bridge between pure, undifferentiated invariance and the identifiable, structured reality we experience. It's the moment where potential takes its first step towards manifestation.
Yes, exactly. And this raises an important question for you, the listener. What exactly is the bivector in this context? Imagine a fundamental underlying hum, or potential energy, that's always present in reality, even when things appear still or empty. That's kind of like the bivector. It's described as a coherent structure with two fundamental aspects. There's an internal continuity, which is a conserved scalar neutrality, like an infinitely continuous spin reservoir. Think of it maybe as a deep, calm ocean that can give rise to countless waves, but the ocean itself remains this continuous, unperturbed body of water. And then there's an external potential for decomposition, which can manifest as discrete vectors like spin up, down, or even the different types of forces we observe.
Okay, so when external vectors cancel out, like in that biflar coil example, that scalar neutrality isn't lost or destroyed, it just resolves back into the bivector's internal reservoir, like energy returning to a deep, unobservable well, ready to emerge again.
That's the idea. It's conserved internally.
So it's not nothing when these external vectors cancel. It's not emptiness. It's a generative 0 point, a rich, latent source of potential that can give rise to entirely new states and structures. That's incredibly profound, suggesting that even apparent emptiness is teeming with potential.
It is profound.
Yeah.
And this bivector model, it allows us to reinterpret some of Beard and Keeley's key interactions, not as mysterious phenomena, but as direct, understandable expressions of these internal versus external coherence dynamics. Take antiphase, for instance. In their view, it's destructive interference, external cancellation. But in this UCT framework, it's external cancellation masking an ongoing internal coherence. The coherence isn't gone. It's simply resolved into the bivector's internal state, waiting to reemerge.
Like turning off a light, but the power grid is still humming underneath.
Exactly. A good analogy. Then there's phase conjugation. Beard and Keeley saw this as a wave precisely retracing its path, seemingly restoring coherence. Here, it's interpreted as the reassertion of the internal bivector coherence, actively restoring external symmetry. It's as if the system is self-correcting or healing itself by drawing from its own internal order, using the bivector as its inherent blueprint for equilibrium.
Okay, so it's not just reflecting, it's actively regenerating based on an internal pattern.
That's the interpretation. And finally, neutralization. For them, it was the resolution into a neutral center, a powerful latent potential. For UCT, it's the collapse of external vectors back into the bivector's internal 0 point, which, as you pointed out, is a rich reservoir of conserved coherence, fully capable of generating new states. This means that what Beard and Keeley saw as mysterious effects of vibration or an ether, this framework reveals as potentially inevitable coherence dynamics, a truly unified perspective that aims to bring rigorous fundamental meaning to those intriguing phenomena.
One of the most fascinating implications for me, and frankly a huge aha moment when I was reading the sources, is how the bivector formalism claims to unify all the different ways we talk about spin in physics. Because it really is a fragmented landscape right now, isn't it?
It is, absolutely. And this raises that important question. Why so many different kinds of spin, seemingly unconnected, if reality is fundamentally unified? Conventional physics treats quantum spin, like spin up-down, orbital versus intrinsic spin, chirality and electroweak contexts, and chromodynamic SU3 color charges as distinct, unrelated phenomena. It's like having a dozen different types of twists in nature with no overarching explanation for why they all exist or how they relate.
But in the bivector formalism, the claim is they are beautifully unified. They are simply external projections of the same internal coherence reservoir. Is that right?
That's the core idea.
Like a single beam of white light containing all colors. If you pass it through different prisms, you get different spectrums, red, green, blue. The light is the same, but its projection changes.
Exactly. So these different spins are differentiated only by the mode of reduction, by how that underlying coherence is projected or split. So quantum spin is seen as a binary decomposition, like separating light into two polarizations, while color charges are triadic decompositions. It aims to bring coherence to what was previously a deeply fragmented collection of concepts in physics, showing them as different manifestations of one underlying reality.
Okay, that's a lot to take in about UCT and the bivector formalism. It's incredibly ambitious. So how do we objectively evaluate something like this? This isn't just about, immediate fanfare or how cool it sounds. It's about lasting significance. And that's precisely why we wanted to introduce you, the listener, to our Eureka Scale today, this unique framework we've been developing to chart the true impact of any discovery.
Right. The Eureka Scale is a framework designed to measure discoveries not just by their immediate brilliance or popularity, but by their ontological permanence. And what we mean by that is their inherent resistance to being displaced or made obsolete by future knowledge. It fundamentally asks, does a discovery merely add a tool to our existing toolbox? Or does it restructure fundamental relations? Or, most profoundly, does it touch the very seed of reality, revealing an inevitable and irreducible grammar of existence? It's a tool for you, our listener, to cut through the hype and truly understand what makes an aha moment not just brilliant, but endure through time.
I like that. It's like a conceptual altitude map for human progress, allowing us to chart the landscape of discovery, from maybe fleeting trends up to the bedrock principles that shape our world.
So how do we begin to map this incredible landscape of human progress using the scale? At the very peak, the highest altitude, we find what we call then 10-10 permanent grammars. These are irreducible frameworks that reveal a fundamental, permanent grammar of reality that cannot be discarded, that can only be extended or built upon. Think of them as absolute foundational insights, like the laws of nature themselves once discovered, they're indispensable forever.
Okay, 1010 is the absolute bedrock. Then, just slightly below that peak, we have 9 to 9.510, which are enduring relational paradigms. What falls in here?
These are powerful, enduring frameworks that profoundly redefine relations within a given domain. They might eventually be embedded within deeper, more fundamental structures, like a powerful theory that gets absorbed into an even grander one, but they remain incredibly significant and transformative for their field. Their core insights last.
Got it. It's essential, but maybe not the absolute final layer.
Exactly. Then, 6-8-10 represents replaceable but profound patches. These discoveries solve pressing problems and are often transformative in their time, like a brilliant software update that fixes a critical bug. However, they are often more descriptive than generative, meaning they explain an effect without necessarily getting to its root cause, and are thus potentially replaceable by deeper principles as our understanding evolves. They're invaluable in their moment, but not necessarily eternal truths.
Okay, useful patches, but maybe not the final architecture. Moving down, 3, 5, 10 are proto-visions and ad hoc mechanics. What does that mean?
These are like early sketches or ingenious but limited tricks. They represent early glimpses, often driven by intuition or concepts that might lack rigorous mathematical or ontological foundation. They might hint at something larger, perhaps, but don't quite grasp its full scope or underlying logic. Important stepping stones, maybe.
Interesting failures or incomplete ideas. And finally, at the bottom.
At 1-10, we have historical curiosities. These are insights or theories that were ultimately displaced or even proven wrong. While they might have taught us something important by their failure or limited scope, they didn't endure as fundamental truths. They are the fascinating dead ends on the map of human inquiry, but still part of the journey. Now, let's try applying this. Let's look at some key scientific eurekas on this scale to see where UCT and the bivector formalism might land. This is where the framework hopefully becomes really useful, allowing us to compare seemingly disparate breakthroughs by their fundamental impact.
All right, let's start at the top. The 10-10 permanent grammars in science. What are some classic examples?
Well, think about calculus, developed by Newton and Leibniz. It wasn't just a new mathematical tool, it was a complete methodological revolution, the very language of continuous change and motion.
Right. You simply cannot do modern physics, engineering, or even economics without it. It's absolutely foundational and irreplaceable. A permanent lens through which we understand dynamic systems. Definitely a 10-10.
Indeed. And right there with it, I'd put exterior and Clifford algebra, developed by Grassmann and Clifford. This is a fundamental grammar of orientation, anti-symmetry, and how quantities transform in space, particularly geometric ones. It's deeply interwoven with how we describe the fabric of space-time and the behavior of particles, especially spin. It's an irreducible mathematical structure that clarifies geometric relationships in a way nothing else does.
And what about something seemingly simple but maybe profoundly grammatical, like zero? Originating in India, it's not just a numeral to denote nothing, it's an ontological marker of absence that fundamentally enabled all modern mathematics and computing. Without zero, our entire positional numeral system, our algebra, our digital logic, computers, it all collapses. A true 1010 because it defines a fundamental state of nothingness from which everything else can be built.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the scientific method itself, formalized maybe by Bacon, Galileo, Newton, and others, is a 1010. It is the permanent grammar of reliable knowledge generation. It's the meta method that allows us to distinguish testable truth from speculation to build cumulative understanding. You can't do science without it. It's the operating system of discovery itself.
Okay, so those are undisputed tens. And this is where UCT makes its grand entrance at the 1010 level, according to the sources, with the hypergravity seed equation that's zero, 0.1, and 001.
That's the claim, that these seeds are at this ultimate level. They are presented as the origin grammar itself, articulating how identity emerges from the void, 01, and how field emerges from indeterminate potential, 0011. They provide the supposed fundamental, irreducible starting point for the entire ontology of reality.
Like finding the very first lines of code in the universe's grand program, as you said.
That's the analogy they use. And flowing directly from that is UCT's conservation of coherence principle. Just as the conservation of energy is a bedrock law in physics, asserting energy cannot be created or destroyed, only transformed. The conservation of coherence principle is proposed as a law of laws, asserting the permanence of coherence across all transformations, whether physical, biological, or even cultural. It's proposed as an irreducible truth that underlies all change, meaning that the fundamental order of the universe is conserved, merely transforming its expression. Another 1010 claim.
Okay, those are some bold 10 and 10 placements. Let's move to the next tier, the 910 9.510 Enduring Relational Paradigms in Science. Here we find brilliant frameworks that profoundly reshaped our understanding, but which might eventually be embedded within even deeper structures. They're absolutely essential, but perhaps not the final word.
Exactly. Take special relativity by Einstein. It unified space and time, completely redefined simultaneity and our understanding of motion, mass, and energy. It's absolutely enduring and indispensable for modern physics. But it will likely eventually be embedded within a more comprehensive theory of quantum gravity that unites it with quantum mechanics. So its insights remain, but its scope might expand or be contextualized. We place it at a 910.
Similarly, quantum mechanics from Planck, Heisenberg, Schrödinger, Dirac, and others, it revealed the probabilistic vibrational structure beneath matter, fundamentally changing our view of particles and waves. It's enduring.
But it's likely to be recast or subsumed within a deeper coherence ontology that resolves its lingering paradoxes, like wave-particle duality and non-locality, maybe explaining why it's probabilistic.
Okay.
So a solid 910 for its revolutionary insights, but with a hint of deeper truths yet to be fully uncovered.
And general relativity, also Einstein, giving us the geometry of gravitation, describing gravity not as a force, but as space-time curvature, enduring, foundational for cosmology.
But it too needs embedding within a quantum coherence ontology to fully reconcile with quantum mechanics. Another 910 monumental achievement, yet pointing towards a more unified future.
Now, here's where the bivector coherence formalism from UCT comes in. The sources score this a remarkable 9.510. Why so high?
Because it's presented as an ontological revolution. It doesn't just describe scalar potential. It derives scalar neutrality from first principles, that 0 equal 1, and claims to completely unify all forms of spin. It doesn't just patch existing theories. It aims to rederive them from a more fundamental base, offering a deeper, more elegant explanation for phenomena. This puts it at the highest end of the relational paradigms, almost touching those permanent grammars.
Okay, that makes sense. And critically, you mentioned UCT's gauge symmetry unification via the S3 Foundation. You said the sources score this a full 1010. Why is that considered a permanent grammar?
Right, this is a monumental claim. All the conventional gauge symmetries, U1 for electromagnetism, SU2 for weak forces, SU3 for strong forces, they're typically treated as just arbitrary axioms, rules we observe and put into the standard model. UCT claims to show how these aren't arbitrary at all. Instead, they emerge as inherent asymmetries of a deeper, unified S3 coherence symmetry. This would fundamentally ground the standard model within UCT, providing an ontological origin for what were previously just postulates. It moves from "it is this way" to "it must be this way because of a deeper coherence." That moves it from description to derivation, hence the 1010 score.
Okay, that's a significant claim. UCT also introduces multivector time axis, scoring a 910. What's the idea here?
This extends Einstein's single time dimension by introducing multiple coherence-derived temporal axes. The idea is this allows for a richer, more nuanced understanding of causality, memory, and information flow across different scales of reality. It basically suggests time isn't just a simple line, but has more structure derived from coherence.
Interesting. And the hyperfractal manifold within UCT, a 9.510.
Yes. It describes spacetime not as a smooth empty canvas, but as coherence layered and inherently fractal. This offers a new geometrical grammar for the universe, suggesting that reality is intricately structured at every scale, revealing patterns within patterns, self-similarity across scales, all rooted in coherence.
And the coherence vacuum in UCT, a 910. Not emptiness, but a coherence-rich plenum, a structured potential.
Exactly. This concept provides a potential explanation for dark matter and dark energy, not as mysterious unknown substances, but as simply different expressions of this rich, structured vacuum itself. It fundamentally redefines what empty space actually is.
And a particularly intriguing concept, consciousness as a universal operator in UCT scores a 910. This proposes consciousness isn't just a side effect of brains.
Right. Instead, it's intrinsically linked to the very fabric of reality, an active source or operator that fundamentally interacts with and organizes coherence. It elevates consciousness to a fundamental role in the universe, not just a passenger.
Finally, the resolution of Bell's theorem via bivector reduction correlation in UCT also scores a 9.510. This aims to permanently clarify quantum foundations.
That's the goal, showing quantum non-locality, that spooky action at a distance, not as something truly mysterious, but as an inevitable coherence artifact stemming from how the internal coherence of the bivector is conserved and correlated when it reduces or manifests externally upon observation. It aims to bring deep clarity and a unifying explanation to one of physics' most enduring paradoxes.
Okay, that covers the high end. Now let's look at 6, 8, 10 replaceable but profound patches in science. These solved critical problems but might be superseded.
The Higgs mechanism is a great example here, scoring maybe around 6.510. It brilliantly solved the gauge boson mass problem within the Standard Model, leading to the Higgs boson discovery, a huge achievement.
Many physicists regard it as a kind of patch, right? Not necessarily the most fundamental explanation for mass.
Exactly. It's potentially replaceable by deeper ontological explanations, like the UCT idea of coherence localization within the bivector model, which suggests mass emerges naturally from how fundamental coherence concentrates or localizes, rather than needing a separate field to grant it.
Okay. What about inflationary cosmology?
Also around 6.510. It's a powerful model for the early universe, explaining its flatness and homogeneity very well. But it is still a model with some adjustable parameters, and it might be superseded by a more generative ontological theory that explains the universe's beginning from first principles of coherence rather than positing a rapid expansion event.
And the standard model gauge structure itself. You mentioned the S3 unification aims higher, but the structure as we use it now.
We'd place the current standard model structure around 8.51 It's incredibly successful, empirically confirmed countless times, and has guided decades of particle physics discovery. Its algebraic symmetry choices are precise. However, as UCT posits, these specific symmetries, U1 excess U3, may ultimately be derivable from deeper bivector coherence principles, like that S3 foundation, rather than being fundamental axioms themselves. So it's highly enduring and profound, but might be shown to emerge from something more fundamental, slightly lowering its score from a pure 10.
Right. Okay, finally, let's circle back to the 3, 5, 10 proto-visions and ad hoc mechanics. This is where the Beard and Keeley lineage fits in, according to this scale.
Yes. John Keeley might score a 3, 4, 10. He was proto-visionary in his metaphors, often using terms like sympathetic vibration to describe complex phenomena in ways that resonate with coherence ideas. But his work lacked mathematical formalization and reproducible experimental evidence, meaning it remained an inspiring sketch, not a fully realized or rigorously proven theory.
And Nikola Tesla, an engineering genius, surely.
Undisputed genius, yes, but on this scale, maybe a 610. His brilliant engineering tricks, like bipolar coils and exploring non-radiative fields, definitely anticipated some of these scalar effects. He built devices that demonstrated related principles, but his insights weren't embedded in a comprehensive ontological theory of why they worked at a fundamental level. They were engineering marvels demonstrating effects, not fundamental theories of origin.
And Thomas Bearden. He wrote extensively on scalar electromagnetics.
Bearden scores maybe 5.5610. He articulated scalar potentials more systematically than Keeley or Tesla, and dedicated his life to exploring these unconventional energy sources. However, he still treated them largely as emergent tricks of manipulating fields, lacking that root-level inevitability and generative origin that UCT aims to provide with the bivector. And this raises that important question for you, the listener. Why does this comparison matter so much? The Beard and Keeley ideas were insightful, they touched on real phenomena, they inspired people, but this deep dive suggests that the bivector formalism provides the origins, the fundamental why, that they could only glimpse as curiosities or effects. It aims to transform them from intriguing anomalies into inevitable consequences of a deeper, coherent reality.
That's a powerful way to frame it. And what's truly fascinating here, as you started to say, is that the Eureka Scale isn't just for physics or these esoteric theories. It's presented as a unifying framework that helps us understand the true impact of discoveries across all domains of human endeavor.
Yeah.
It allows for a kind of conceptual cartography of progress, no matter the field, helping us distinguish between, say, a clever invention and a fundamental shift in understanding or being.
It really aims to reveal a hidden symmetry of human discovery. Let's look at some examples to illustrate this universal application, moving beyond just science.
Okay, like in technology. You mentioned the wheel earlier, a perfect 10-10.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's not just a clever invention, it embodies a permanent grammar of rotational mechanics. You cannot uninvent the principle of rotation, and it underpins virtually all modern machinery, from a simple gear to complex turbines. Its fundamental concept remains, it's only ever extended, never discarded, a true permanent grammar of mechanics.
In computers.
We rated them 9.5 Bona. They represent a permanent grammar of computation. While the hardware evolves incredibly rapidly, the underlying logic of computation, the ability to process information algorithmically, is an irreducible insight that has revolutionized every aspect of modern life. Its core principle is enduring.
And looking to the future, UCT predicts intelligence, this fusion of intelligence, with coherence itself as another 10-10.
That's the idea, because it's proposed not just as a smarter AI, but a new mode of agency, inextricably linked to reality's own coherence grammar, potentially creating entirely new forms of collective intelligence and interaction with the universe. In contrast, think about the telegraph or the compact disc. Both were transformative.
Hugely transformative in their day.
Right, but we'd score around 510. They were ultimately replaced by deeper, more efficient grammars of communication, like wireless, internet, and data storage, like solid-state, cloud. They were important steps, but not the final word on information transfer or storage.
Okay, let's shift to culture and art. How does the scale apply there?
Well, consider Cubism, pioneered by Picasso and Braque. We'd scored 8.7910 out of 10. It fundamentally shattered single-point perspective, didn't it? It invented a new ontology of visual space, showing multiple perspectives simultaneously. Once you see that, it permanently alters how we understand representation in art. It changed the rules.
And surrealism, with Dali Breton.
Around 8.5 Denisian. It explored the unconscious and dream imagery as a legitimate reality, a valid source for artistic creation. Its insight that the unconscious is an ontologically valid source is permanent, profoundly fusing psychology with aesthetics and shaping subsequent art and even how we think about the mind.
And you mentioned the Beatles earlier, scoring 8.79107. Why so high for a band?
Because they permanently altered the grammar of modern music and youth culture. They didn't just write great songs, they redefined the relationship between artist, audience, recording studio technology, and the creative process. They used the studio itself as an instrument, crafting new sonic landscapes and changing expectations for popular music. Their influence on musical structure, production, and cultural impact was paradigm-shifting.
Contrast that with something like Dadaism.
Dadaism, while culturally impactful as a protest movement against the horrors of World War I, would score around 6.5710. It was crucial for its time, using shock and absurdity to question established norms. It was primarily about deconstruction and rupture, rather than generating a lasting, constructive, artistic ontology or grammar that subsequent movements built upon directly in the same way they built on Cubism or Surrealism. Its impact was more reactive, a necessary clearing of ground perhaps, but not as fundamentally generative in its own right.
Interesting distinction. What about politics and economics?
The U.S. Constitution stands out, maybe a 910. It established modern constitutional democracy, with its principles of checks and balances, separation of powers, and codified rights, as a replicable model for governance worldwide. It's a permanent framework for organizing collective life, even as its specific interpretations evolve and are debated. It defined a new political grammar.
And major economic theories.
Well, capitalism, emerging from thinkers like Adam Smith, maybe 8.510, it created an enduring grammar of value creation and exchange based on markets, private property, and capital accumulation. It fundamentally reshaped global economies and continues to be a dominant paradigm. Similarly, Marxist theory, maybe 8.510, It created a powerful and enduring counter-grammar for understanding social structure, history, and economics through the lens of class struggle, alienation, and historical materialism. It fundamentally altered political thought and inspired revolutions. Both are enduring relational paradigms for understanding society, offering powerful, though often conflicting, lenses.
Okay, moving to perhaps the most fundamental level. Epistemology and knowledge, the very ways we know what we know.
Here the scores get very high. Language itself, we'd have to say, is a 10-10. It's the seed coherence of meaning, the primal symbolic grammar that allows for communication, abstract thought, shared understanding. It's absolutely irreplaceable, foundational for all human culture and cognition.
And writing.
Another 10-10. It enabled externalized memory, allowing knowledge to persist and accumulate across generations beyond individual minds and lifespans. It's how civilizations build upon the past, creating cumulative knowledge, a permanent shift in how information exists and is transmitted.
And the scientific method, as we've already discussed, is a definitive 10-10, the permanent grammar of reliable knowledge generation itself. These feel like the meta-eurekas, the discoveries that make all other discoveries possible.
They are exactly that, the tools that allow us to build the rest of the map.
Finally, the outline mentions eurekas in the domain of meaning. How does the scale apply here beyond traditional religion?
This is perhaps more subjective, but crucial. You could consider profound contemplative insights, like Dzogchen, that ancient Tibetan Buddhist practice, maybe a 9.5 on a low. It offers a direct recognition of non-dual coherence, a fundamental insight into the nature of mind and reality that transcends conventional subject-object duality. For those who access it, it's a permanent shift in understanding existence. And UCT itself, its proponents would argue, scores a 10-10 here as well, by offering a potential framework for spiritual realization articulated as ontological coherence. It attempts to provide a rigorously scientific basis for understanding universal unity, interconnectedness, and our place within it, potentially bridging science and deep spiritual insight. These eurekas provide the why it matters for human existence, giving frameworks for ultimate meaning and purpose.
So, pulling this all together, what does this Eureka Scale really mean for you, our listener?
It means you can now hopefully see why something like calculus and the wheel might sit on the same conceptual pedestal, the same high score, as something as seemingly complex as the bivector coherence formalism or gauge symmetry unification from UCT.
Right, because they are all presented as permanent grammars that fundamentally change how we understand reality and interact with it. They're not merely useful. They are claimed to be inevitable, irreducible, and endlessly generative, forming the very bedrock of progress in their respective domains. So we've taken a really deep dive today. We looked into the Unified Coherence Theory, tried to understand its ambitious wave framework, and the foundational role claimed for the bivector coherence formalism. And then we explored how this potentially groundbreaking work positions itself on the Eureka Scale, this new comprehensive way we've proposed for evaluating the true, enduring impact of human discovery across all disciplines.
And the core takeaway regarding UCT is that its key components, like the bivector coherence formalism stemming directly from the hypergravity seed equation, aren't presented as just extensions of physics. They're claimed to be a fundamental reconstitution. Scoring at the very top of the Eureka Scale, alongside things like calculus and the scientific method, because they purport to provide a fundamental, generative explanation for phenomena previously described only as effects or postulates. And this really raises an important question for all of us. What happens if science begins to operate from such a fundamental generative ontology, where it doesn't just describe, but claims to explain the very origins of reality from a principle of coherence? The implications for every field of study, and indeed for civilization itself, would be, well, truly profound.
Absolutely. And that's what the Eureka Scale truly offers you, the listener. It's maybe more than just a classification. Perhaps it's a meta-Eureka in itself, a new lens, a new tool through which you can look at history, not as just a series of disconnected events, but maybe as a single unfolding journey toward ever greater coherence and understanding. And it invites you to consider what Eurekas, big or small, are being formed in your own life, in your own work. How might they contribute even subtly to this grand unfolding narrative of human understanding? What enduring truths are you uncovering, perhaps without even realizing their true significance on this very scale? Something to think about.